Alright guys, welcome back to the next section of video notes for our unit dealing with transformations. Today we're continuing to add on to the rules that we talked about last time, and we're really just adding an extra step. So there's not going to be too much new information, it's just kind of practicing these same kind of concepts that we talked about last time. So notes for today, label is going to be 4.2, composition of transformations, and then date today is the 17th if you'd like to add that. Objective, kind of like I said, is we've talked with those rules, and now we want to be able to apply this with multiple transformations and still practicing how to find the coordinates of where that image would end up. Okay, so first definition here we need to talk about when we talk about composition of transformations. All this means is I'm basically just adding a second step. So composition of transformations is when we apply a transformation. Okay, when we apply a transformation to an image, and then we apply another transformation. Okay, when we apply a transformation to an image and then we apply another transformation to that figure or to that image. Okay, so like I said, composition, what that means is just adding on another step or multiple or a collection of multiple things. So composition of transformations is just a collection of multiple transformations that we're going to be working on here. All right, so with this in mind, we're still going to use those rules. So if you have those rules that we wrote down last time from 4.1, those are going to be very helpful because we're going to use those still as we go throughout these problems here. So example 1, I want you to take a sec, I want you to sketch this diagram for me. It doesn't need to be exact, but just need to have the y-axis here and then the x-axis written as well. And then we'll come back together in just a second. Okay, so hopefully you have this written down, labeling the points A, B, and C here. And given triangle ABC, what I want to do here is I want to reflect it over the x-axis, and then from that new image that we get after we reflect over the x-axis, I want to reflect over the y-axis here. So first thing, if I'm going to solve a problem like this, kind of like we did last time, obviously we need to write down our original coordinates, and we need to make sure that we're being accurate with those. So if I look at A is at the point 2, 4. So I'm going to write that down here, 2, 4. B is at the point 0, 2. 0, 2. And then C is at the point here, 4, 1. And I think I kind of mentioned this on the last video, but the intention with these rules and the place that we're hoping to get to is a point where I don't even need the diagram necessarily. I can just give you a set of coordinates and say, where would these end up? Okay, so that's our goal that we're going to try to get to. For this, if we are applying the first transformation, that's going to give me A prime, B prime, and C prime. And remember from last class, that's just new transformations or the new image, what that's going to look like. And if we're reflecting over the x-axis, well, how do we do that? We can either draw this out or we can just check our notes, and we see that the rule for reflecting over the x-axis is that the x-coordinates stay the same, and then the y-coordinates change their sign. So if we do that with A here, A prime is going to be 2. 2 is going to stay the same, and then the y-coordinate changes its sign, so it becomes -4. Continue here, B, the x-coordinate stays the same, so it stays 0, and then the y-coordinate changes the sign to be -2. And then C prime here, we have 4, 1. 4 stays the same, -1 to change the sign. All right, so this would be where we usually stop and we'd be done here. Now we're just adding on another transformation, and we're going to use these new coordinates in order to do that. So that's the only real big piece of information that you need to understand is we're using the new coordinates that we just wrote to then continue that pattern in that next transformation. So if we're looking at this, this would now give us A double prime, B double prime, and C double prime. And again, we're just kind of adding as many kind of apostrophe little symbols as we need for how many transformations that we're doing. So next one here, if it says I want to reflect over the y-axis, well, remember this one, it's the opposite. It says the x-coordinates change their sign and the y-coordinates stay the same. And if we don't remember that, that's completely fine. We just checked our notes to make sure that that is the case. So what that means for us here is we change the sign on the x-coordinate. So A double prime now becomes -2, and then y coordinate stays the same. So it's going to stay as -4. Continuing here, 0, change the sign. Well, the good news with 0, whether it's negative or positive, it's neither. It just stays 0. And then the y coordinate still stays the same, so that's going to be -2. And then final one here, c double prime, we have +4. So if I want to change that, that becomes -4, and then the y coordinate is now going to stay the same. Okay, and these are the sets of coordinates that I'm going to be looking for our answers here. We might have some times where we'll sketch this out and show here's where it went when I reflect over the x and then reflect over the y. But like we've said, the coordinates is really what I'm focused on here. Okay, so let's just continue to practice this and make sure we have these rules down here. So example 2, now we're transitioning so that we don't have a figure necessarily. We just have the coordinates given to us. So I want you to take a second, I want you to pause your video, and I want you to just write down these coordinates for me for P, Q, and R. All right, so if we're looking at this here, we have these points, and it says given these coordinates, we want to rotate the figure 180 degrees, and then we want to translate it using the vector -6, 2. So throwing in our other two transformations that we've talked about. So if I want to see where these end up, these will be P prime, Q prime, and R prime here. So if we're looking at P prime, again, if we're rotating 180 degrees, I just need to check my notes and see, okay, what was the rule that we had for 180 degrees? And all that says is that I change the sign on the x coordinate and the y coordinate. The numbers themselves stay where they're at, I'm just changing the signs. So -5 becomes +5, and -4 becomes +4. Same thing here with Q prime. -2 is going to change the sign to a +2, and then +1 now becomes -1. And then last one here, R prime. If I have 3, 7, we change the sign on both, so I have -3, -7. All right, so we'll pause here for a sec, and one question I want to ask as well is why did I not say what direction we were rotating 180 degrees in? Because remember, when we talked about 90 and 270, we said we can either rotate clockwise or counterclockwise. So I want you to ask yourself this question real quick. Why didn't I include whether it's clockwise or counterclockwise? Okay, answer to that, just in case you don't know, if I'm looking at a graph, if I start up here, for instance, if I go 180 degrees counterclockwise, I would go this direction and end up over here. Or if I go 180 degrees clockwise, or counterclockwise, excuse me, okay, same thing, they're going to end up in the same spot no matter whether you're going counterclockwise or whether you're going clockwise there. Okay, so just something to keep in mind. All right, last one here. Now we need to translate it using the vector -6, 2. So I'm going to draw these out here. Next transformation, we have P double prime, Q double prime, and R double prime. And if I want to write these coordinates out, as a reminder, when I'm translating an object, that just means I'm moving it or I'm just shifting it. The orientation where it's facing does not change at all. And when I use this vector, all it's telling me to do is how do I change the x coordinates and how do I change the y coordinates. So since the first number is -2, I subtract 2 from all the x coordinates. And then since the second number is 6, I add 6. Since it's a positive, I add 6 to all the y coordinates. So 5, 4 here, when I subtract 2 from the x coordinate, is now going to be +3. And then when I add 4 to the y coordinate, that's going to be 10. Continuing with Q prime and Q double prime here, when I subtract 2 from 2, that just gives me 0. And then when I add 6 to the second coordinate, or the y coordinate, -1 now becomes +5. Last one here, R double prime, we have -3, we subtract 2, so that's going to be -5. And then when I have -7 and I add 6, remember that's getting closer to 0, and that would be -1. And again, just like before, these are my final answers here. So I'm just practicing. Really, it's just another day of just practicing and making sure we have these rules down and understand how to work through these. And I kind of mentioned this at the beginning of this unit, but this unit isn't too complicated. This is the meat and potatoes. This is the main course of our unit. What I need to know is just understanding how to use these rules here. Okay. So one of the last examples we'll do here. Now we're given this diagram. I want you to take a sec, and I do want you to pause your video and sketch this diagram for me. Okay. So hopefully you've got that written down. Same thing as before, just needed the y-axis and the x-axis, and just roughly where the points are at. First thing it asked me to do is it asked me to reflect over the line of y equals x, and then after that we're going to rotate it 90 degrees clockwise. So I'm going to start, I'm going to plot my points and write down where my coordinates are at for right now. We see that D is at the point 4, 1. E is at the point here 1, -4. And then F is at the point 6, -2. Make sure you take your time and get those coordinates correct, because like I said, if we're working on a quiz or an assignment or something and you don't get those right, then it's going to be very difficult to get your final coordinates correct. So we're going to do the first transformation here, reflected over the line y equals x. So if I look at this here, D prime, E prime, and F prime, all I need to do is double check my notes from last time and see what is that rule for reflecting over the line y equals x. Excuse me. And all it says is I just take the x coordinate and the y coordinate and I just switch the place of them. I just swap their places. So for instance, if I'm looking at 4, 1, all I need to do to apply that rule is switch it around to be 1, 4. Okay, signs don't change, I'm just changing the positions or changing the places. Next one here, E is at 1, -4, so E prime is going to be -4, 1. And then F is at 6, -2, so F prime is going to be at -2, 6. All right, so I've got the first set of coordinates here. We're going to use these. With our second transformation, we'll have D double prime, E double prime, and F double prime. And if I'm looking at this here, the next thing it wants me to do is rotate it 90 degrees counterclockwise. And this is one of those rules that I mentioned that it's a little bit tougher to use than some of the other ones, because we have to visualize where the point starts and where it ends up. So if I look at my rules for rotating 90 degrees, all it says is this. It says I switch X and Y, so basically we're going to be switching them back now, and then I need to change the sign on one of the coordinates. The good news is that's the same for D, E, and F, but I just need to figure out what it's going to be for the first one. Do I change the sign on the X coordinate, or do I change the sign on the Y coordinate? And how that works, or what I would recommend, is I want you to visualize where this point is at. So let's start with D here. Let's do our first step, because sometimes students forget this. We have 1, 4. The first thing I need to do is switch them. So change it back to 4, 1. And then we're going to figure out which of these coordinates should I change the sign on. So if we think about this here, 1, 4 roughly starts in this quadrant. I don't need to know exactly where it's at. I just need to know that it's in the top right, because I know the X coordinates and the Y coordinates in that quadrant are positive. And then if it wants me to rotate 90 degrees clockwise, every time I go 90 degrees, that's just hopping from one quadrant to the next. So in this case, I would go 90 degrees, and since I would go clockwise, I would go down. And so I know it's going to end up somewhere in this quadrant here. Okay? So my question is, if I'm looking at a point in that quadrant in the bottom right, what we call quadrant 4, which of those coordinates is going to be negative, or which of those coordinates do I need to change the sign on? The X coordinate or the Y coordinate? Okay, well if I look at this, the X coordinates are positive since I'm to the right of the Y axis, but the Y coordinates are negative since it's below the X axis here. So what does that mean for our problem? That means I need to change the sign on the Y coordinate. And that's how I determine which one I'm going to say changes its sign. The good news is once you figure out this first one, it's the same rule for the rest. So that now means I'm going to switch my X and Y coordinates, and then I'm always going to change the sign on the Y coordinate. So right here, E prime to E double prime changes back from -4, 1 to 1, -4. And then I'm going to change the sign on the Y coordinate like we did before. So now I erase that and it becomes 1, +4. I'm going to erase that a little bit more and rewrite that just so it's closer. Okay, and last one here, same thing, -2, 6. I switch that back. Make sure you always do that step first. And then I change the sign on the Y coordinate because that's the same thing we found with D. So now it becomes 6, +2. And these are the coordinates I was looking for on this problem. So like I said, if you know how to rotate 90 degrees, that one is one of the toughest rules. If I can do that, then I should be fine for any problem that would be thrown my way in these kinds of, or in this unit, okay? So just something to keep in mind. All right, actually almost done here. I only have one more example, and you won't need to write anything down here, but wanted to talk about different ways or different transformations that you can see in real life here. So if I look at this on example 4, like I said, I won't have you write this down, but it says, given these pictures, I want to describe the transformations that could be used to create them. Because like I've mentioned, you can kind of see these transformations in different spots in life, or in real life, I should say. So if I'm looking at picture A, you can take a second if you'd like and pause your video and try to answer this question on your own. What would be the transformation that is shown here? Okay? So hopefully you're able to see it. That answer would be reflection. Okay, I see off the pond there, I have two different images. One is a mirror image of the other. So this is an example of reflection. All right, and then same thing for B. I want you to take a second. I want you to pause your video, and I want you to ask yourself, if I'm looking at, looks like kind of like an apartment building, what would be an example, or which transformation would fit this example here? Okay, so hopefully you're able to answer that on your own as well. And this one would just be translation. Because I have the same kind of picture here. I have this, this apartment on the left side, and it's just repeated over and over and over, and it's just shifted. And notice it's not reflection because it's not a mirror image. The door is always on the left on all of these apartments, okay? And it's not rotation either because the way that the building is facing or the apartment is facing is not changing either. So in this case, I'm just moving it or shifting it, so that would be translation, okay? And that's it, guys. That's all our notes for today. Like I said, not too much new information. We'll only have one more thing or one more type of transformation that we need to talk about for this unit. And then, like I said, we move through it pretty quick, and we'll have a quiz over this before we go to Thanksgiving here. So, rest of time today, you have to work on 4.2, composition of transformations. I will print this one out as well because there will be some that you need to write down / graph. So feel free or make sure to ask questions about that once you're done with the video so that I can give you that handout. Okay? Otherwise, you guys should be good to go. Thanks, guys.